Hello and welcome to the thankfully final part of this very challenging project, the Kinetic Sea Harrier FRS.1. This episode details the final painting and finishing, and it all started with a primer coat, and this is the Mr. Surfacer primer, and I'm very pleased with this stuff. Not been using it long, but it goes down really thin, shrinks right into all the detail, and it's really great for finding those flaws. And actually, for a project with a whole load of filler scribing, rubbing down, rebuilding, blah, actually there was pretty much nothing to do. No corrections, nothing like that. Yeah, I think I was quite lucky. About the first time anything went right with this flipping thing, but there we are. So it's really quite thin, this, just very light layers, just laying it down, and we'll leave that to dry, and then we'll give it a little bit of a polish with a very worn sanding sponge. Now for the paint itself. So this is the MRP white. It goes down beautifully thin. It's got a really strong pigment, so it covers really nicely. And even though I did paint and mask these areas as I went along, as you probably saw in the last episode, yeah, I just kind of started again really. And same as the primer, just putting it down in thin coats, building up the opacity, sort of long strokes as you can see there, keeping the airbrush moving. It's fairly close as you can see. But there we go, you can see how well it covers just over that grey primer. It's not that dark, the grey primer. But these aeroplanes didn't really weather that much. They weren't in service very long in this colour scheme. And we'll have none of the sort of marbling or pre-shading, anything like that, thank you. All the real things are very solid coats. Masking. Now this was a real epic because the extra dark sea grey overlaps on the leading edges, and trying to get the demarcation line around the contours of the intakes pretty much all the way back to the cold nozzle, that's the front nozzles, trying to get them symmetrical was really quite hard, but managed it in the end, as you can see. Again, turning to the MRP and laying it down exactly the same. Desperately trying to avoid any build-up along the edge of the tape. Don't want any ridges, anything like that. But the paint is really thin and it's really opaque. So there's no worries there, actually. And again, obviously no pre-shading. I don't do pre-shading anyway. In fact, I've done a video on that. You can hunt that one out. But yeah, a solid coat, and there's the underside there, and with the masking off, and the demarcation looks really nice, I think. I did do a little bit of fading on the top. I didn't want it too bland. It's very subtle, just a little bit of the lightened base colour over some of the panel lines and around some of the details, just to break it up a little bit. There we go. Not too much, and we'll just leave that to dry off. Right, I didn't actually film the decaling, but yeah, kit decals were used. They are cartograph, and you can see how beautifully they went down. I was tempted to paint some of the markings, and actually I'm really glad I used the decals in the end, because they were superb. A little bit of a touch up on the tail from some of the sticky out bits, but yeah, I was delighted how they went down. Nose cone was next, and you can see all that silver foil. Obviously I've got decals down, so I was very careful not to put any tape over any decals, and using the tin foil as a bit of a bigger mask meant I didn't have to risk any of that. It works a treat. and these little widgets on the tail, they were masked off and sprayed as well, and that's kind of the finished paint job there. Before any varnish coat went down, and I did use some VMS satin, it was time for an oil wash, and I wanted again to keep this quite subtle. These aeroplanes were really clean in service, and yeah, lesser in the Falklands, but they were all over extra dark sea grey. But these early sort of pre-Falkland schemes were really clean, and so I just did a little bit of an oil wash underneath, being careful not to use too much of a contrast, so a sort of warm mid-grey tone, and that was allowed to dry off properly a good few hours, and then just buffed off with the kitchen roll, and then I just backed it up with the brush. So this has been dampened with some white spirit, or enamel thinners actually, probably the same sort of stuff. No doubt you'll let me know in the comments what the differences are, but yeah, just going in with the brush there, just tidying things up, manipulating the wash, trying to clean some of the panels, manipulate some of that wash along the panel lines, as you can see what I'm doing here. Just neatening things up actually. I didn't want a sort of actual filter effect, I did want the wash to go into the detail, and yeah, just not too monochrome, just break it up a little bit, but I didn't want like an all over filter over the white. I wanted it quite bright. When you look at the pictures, it really is a bright white. Does kind of creep over the dark grey in areas, so you do have to clean that off. You see the nose cones had a satin varnish there on that previous shot. Now for the upper surface, and again I mixed up this sort of dark grey, browny, greeny colour. And initially I started going over just the panel lines and the detail, and then I went, nah, let's go all over. And you can see how I'm using the wash. I'm actually working it into all that detail. And yeah, that's going to take a little bit of a while to dry. But when it is dry, we can just buff it off with a bit of kitchen towel. Got to be careful not to rub it out of all the panel lines, so make sure it really is dry, and then you can just buff it away. See, the model at this point has had a varnish coat over the top that will protect the decals, as well as giving a nice sheen, and it just gives a little bit of bite to the wash. Just some cotton buds into some awkward areas required, and then I'm going to leave that for a good couple of days really. But we can still manipulate the wash, and just streaking it back, making some very subtle streaking effects there. Now for the nozzles. So these are from Ares, painted in various burnt metal alclad shades, should say. And then going in with the dry brush paint. This stuff is absolutely brilliant. If you've not tried it, you really must. It is fantastic. That was all sealed in with a coat of matte varnish, which isn't actually matte, it's a bit satin as you can see, and then in with the oil paint. So lots of sort of burnt tones. I don't want a rusty effect, I want a tarnished effect. So wet blending the oil and then hitting it with a hairdryer, just being careful because they are resin, you don't want to melt them. And you see the you get a nice sort of patina there with the oils over the mat, and then they simply just glue in with a bit of super glue. See, I've done the burn plate at the back as well, just using the same techniques. Right, undercarriage now, and mixing up some 5-minute epoxy. The nose wheel, fair to say that it wasn't exactly a positive location It was a bit sort of floaty, if that makes sense. So it was out with a 5-minute epoxy, and I kind of held it in place for 5 minutes, making sure it was straight, just nudging it in the right direction. And then I did eventually actually drill through that mount and insert a pin just to back that up. Didn't actually end up filming that, but yeah, 5-minute epoxy was definitely required here, I would say. Outriggers, conversely, were a really positive fit. Just a little bit of super glue and they just popped into place. Just making sure that they were at the right angle, they weren't sort of towed in. And then the whole thing actually sits on the nose wheel and the outriggers without the main wheel. The main wheel, as you can see, has been pinned, and I've got brass tube in the fuselage. So this main wheel actually floats and it will move up and down. And that ensures all the wheels are going to be in contact with the ground. So it's not actually glued in place at all, the wheels. Got to be quite careful when actually settling it down, and then I just use some tweezers just to pull the wheels down if they stick. This is the resin air brake. Now mostly was closed on the ground, just needed to do a little bit of trimming with the nippers there, but yeah, I did see photos with the air brake out, obviously down for maintenance, and it's a shame to cover up all that detail, so I glued it open. Final stretch now, putting things together. Ejection seat goes in. That was glued in with the Ammo Ultra Glue, which is just brilliant. It's acrylic resin and a nice strong bond, and it will dry clear and it won't fog any clear parts or anything like that. Just going to check, see how that seat looks. Canopy was too narrow for the width of the fuselage, which was a nightmare. So yeah, no chance of a closed canopy option on this one. Oh, turn it around, Jamie. Right, these are the magnetic ordnance and the pylons. They just slot into place. I did actually pack them up with a little bit of Ammo Ultra Glue, actually, just to be safe, because I do have to bring this back in the suitcase. Just the final touches now. Clear parts have gone on. The pitot from that was brass replacement from Albion, and then the very light final part, and this just sums up the build. This was a faff, just trying to get the canopy on. Oh my days, I mean, come on, this kit has fought me from day one, and it fought me right to the very end, but I'm not going to let it beat me. Take a few moments away from the camera, get some emotion out, and there we go, it's on. So thanks very much for sticking with this project. Yeah, what a horrendous experience, but it's all done, and I'm actually quite pleased with the result. So I'll leave you with some pictures and see you on the next one. Cheers, bye bye.
Retribution. Oh yeah, we want retribution.